Welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The War Games, written by Terrance Dicks and Malcolm Hulke, directed by David Maloney, and it is the only story produced as a sole producer by Derek Sherwin, who had been producing a show previously, but this time he is the main producer, and this is the only story he's done. Now, this story is 10 episodes long. This DVD is 3 discs long with the special features on disc 3. And it's really long, so we're not going to be talking about the whole story. But let me just backtrack a bit. This story is considered by a lot of people a really great story with some issues. A lot of people say like they enjoy the first half and the second and the third half, but they don't really think, they think the middle bit is padded. Even Terrance Dicks, the writer, one of the writers of this episode, he said that he wasn't keen on this story. However, in my opinion, this is just me, in my opinion, this is my personal favourite Doctor Who story. This is 10 out of 10 gold, wouldn't cut any scene out. It's dripping with a sort of storytelling that makes it feel epic, engaging, and I just can't describe enough how amazing this story is. Like I said, it's 10 parts, so we're not going to go into huge details about plot lines, but let me see if I can get my opinions out there. So the story starts off with Dr. Jamie and Zoe landing in 1917, I believe, during World War I, specifically in No Man's Land. And here they come across these two characters called Lady Jennifer and Lieutenant Carster. Now, an interesting fact about Lady Jennifer is that she would later appear in a Anton Dracula novel, which isn't in the Doctor Who universe, but for some reason her character is in one of the novels. I believe it's called The Bloody Red Baron, but I could be wrong. But yeah, and these characters, we grow to like them, and they've basically been in this war so long that they can't remember. Now, at this point, we start to learn about a secret mystery, and that is in the story is that these characters are starting to forget things. I like how it's really subtly done. To begin with, the first time we meet Lady Jennifer, she says that she doesn't remember how long she's been there, and we don't really think about it to begin with, and then we learn a little bit more, like she forgot where the hospital is, and Carster, he can't remember how long he's been in there, and then he later on describes how he can't remember certain names and places. And the mystery sort of builds up, and it's just brilliant because it never feels like they've just gone, hold on, that's a mystery, that's a plot. It slowly builds up, and it goes from just small details that you don't really think about to having like hold on, what's happening here? So, for the most part in episode 1 and episode 2, there is no science fiction elements. And I really like this because, it's World War I. Do you need any more drama in that? And the setting here is very, very well handled. The shooting on this barren moor, and the trenches and the uniform and the costumes and the directing by David Maloney does a fantastic job at making you feel like you're in World War I. It reminds me a lot of like TV shows set during World War One. That's like solely dependent on the World War One setting. So yeah, that is just amazing, and I really, really love the cliffhanger for part one where the Doctor is basically getting gunned down and he's tied up to a stick, and they're all gun pointed at him as he's sent on trial and been sentenced to death as a spy. And it's one of those cliffhangers that is so well that they do repeat it later on in the Fifth Doctor era. I find that really funny. However, we get a character at this point called Smythe, who he seems to control people by putting on a monocle, and when people are not convinced that the Doctor, Jamie and Zoe are not spies, he can convince them otherwise. And it becomes a bit obvious in their trial scene where he's with these two other officers, and they're like, I can't see how they could be spies, and then he uses his monocle and it's like, you will obey me basically, and you will believe they're spies. And yeah, that is such really cool. Now, for the cliffhanger of episode 2, I'm going to put it out spoiler, because I think one of the great aspects of this story is its concept. And the main concept doesn't come in until episode 2. So please watch it. It is fantastic. It is well written. You're not going to be disappointed. Like I said, it's my favourite story. So there you go, spoiler warning. So in episode 2, the Doctor and the crew, they get an ambulance and they're trying to escape from Smythe. And whilst this has happened, they go past a fog, and then when they get out of the fog, there's no war. They can't hear any gun firing or bombs or anything. It's just completely quiet. And then suddenly, Roman soldiers start appearing. That was just a great cliffhanger, and they start chasing them and stuff. Maybe if I had a big issue with that particular scene, I would say that the Romans are too far away for any really threat. But it's more of the shock to see Romans all of a sudden in this World War One story. And then and this basically introduces us to the concept of this story. My God, is this fantastic. Ready for this? Ready? So, it turns out the bad guys are aliens. Obviously, it's Doctor Who. And what they've done is they've kidnapped people from different times of war on the planet Earth and made them basically fight on a different planet, making them believe that they are still in the war that they're fighting. And what these aliens are going to do, they're going to make them all fight each other to determine which are basically the best time for humans during wartime. And then they're going to make an army of that particular era of humans and conquer the galaxy with them. That is such a fantastic idea. I honestly think that could have been an entire series on its own. How cool is that? I mean, I think if you wanted to edit the Doctor, Zoe and Jamie out of their story and just have a completely non-Doctor Who related story about the War Games, I think that would have been awesome. I would have loved to see a spin-off with this idea. But it's a Doctor Who story. And luckily we got the 10 parts this concept deserves, because we get introduced to, obviously, the First World War, but then we get introduced into the American Civil War. And although we don't see much from the other zones, especially, we see a bit of the Roman zone and that's about it, which is kind of disappointing. But you do get the idea anyway, the grand concept of the idea, and you do meet other lovable characters. Another thing absolutely brilliant about this story is its villains. They're called the Warlords. They're never actually named in the story. They are just the aliens. And I like how they're not named. I like how a lot of their character is left, as a species, are left to the imagination. But what we can gather, basically, this whole idea, this whole operation, is basically just another job to them. There's this character who's basically like a lecturer teaching all the students of this race how to basically mind control humans to do their will and make them believe that they're fighting in their own war. I absolutely love this idea, and I love how the Doctor disguises himself as a student there. And some of the greatest scenes come from the dynamic of Patrick Troughton and this guy, and how the Doctor basically plays around with him. But in terms of like our main villains, the ones that we focus on, there is not one villain. There is not two. There is 5 main villains. And in my opinion, I think they're really cool. The first two we got to talk about is Smythe and Von Week. They're basically the ones who run the operation from within. So what they do is they disguise themselves as people of power. Like Smythe, we've just previously talked about. But Von Week, in the Civil War zone, he pretends to be one of the, I think it's the South, a leader of the South. And so these characters, they basically play this war game as if it's a game. And basically, Doctor Who, every science fiction story, any story, but mainly science fiction, is heavily political and full of meanings, and these characters represent basically greedy politicians during wartime, as basically, to them, this is all just a game. This is just a farce for them to just gain more power. To them, the soldiers don't really mean anything. They are people to be used for war and profiteering, and this gets this idea across really well. There's a few scenes where you see them in their base, and they've got like a map out, and they're basically like treating it as if they're playing like a board game. And I absolutely love that scene. It's only for like a small scene that you see them together, but it works really well. And they're like testing each other's army's morale and stuff. And yeah, like I said, they're basically politicians, and it's not like over your head, beat it, but it is not obvious. Well, it is obvious, but it's not beaten over your head. So they are like the more the henchman kind, but they are big enough that I think they deserve to be the villain spot. Their superiors, we got 2 other characters. We have the security chief, this really weird character who's got this really strange voice. I'm not going to try and do it because I'm going to hurt my throat if I do. But something about him just strikes iconic to me. The way his glasses kind of shimmer with the light, the way he talks, the way he stands up, the way he basically acts like a robot a bit, and he's always questioning his second in command, the war chief. And these two banter are hilarious in some scenes. Like the war chief, basically, he's not a warlord. He's something else, which we will get into. And the security chief, he suspects him of basically going to betray the warlords. And so it becomes a basically cat and mouse between these two characters, as they're both in the same position and they're trying to basically outdo each other. And it's just really interesting. And especially when the Doctor, Zoe and Jamie come in, and he suspects that they might be working for the war chief. Now, bit of a spoiler here, another spoiler. If you don't want any spoilers, don't watch this moment. So it turns out the war chief recognises the Doctor. And in episode 6, we discover that they are both of the same race. They are both a race known as the Time Lords. Yes, This story is the first mention of the Time Lords, and a lot of people, I think this story wouldn't have done so well if it came out today. Like, before, one of the biggest aspects was the mystery of the Doctor. Everybody is like, loves how we basically know nothing about the Doctor prior to his TARDIS adventures. And now we get basically the name of his race and why he left, which is basically he got bored of doing nothing and he wanted to save people. And I think there's a few people who still don't like that idea, but I think it's now grown in culture that we all basically accept it as fact. And I don't think it's done badly here as well. I think it's done enough that you do keep a lot of mystery. You still feel like you don't know the Doctor personally, but you do know a bit now that you can start putting the pieces together, like he's a Time Lord and he got bored and stuff. So, you know, and I like how it's more casual. They didn't bring up, like if this was made today, they would have made a whole fuss that like his parents were some sort of like ultimate beings and he's got like a massive heritage, or like he's like the prince or something. But no, here he's just, with the Time Lords, he's just some guy that got bored and decided to steal a time machine from his people. That is such a cool idea, and I love it. And yeah, I know what people are thinking, asking in now to me is like, oh, what about the recent Doctor Who as of this video, which we will get into when we talk about the Timeless Child. So don't worry, we will get into it, and I'll tell my opinions then. But for now, we're talking about the War Games, the best Doctor Who story in the show's history. So yeah, the Doctor and the War Chief, they know each other. And the War Chief, he basically tries to get the Doctor to work for him. And he basically plans to overthrow the Warlords. And it's here that it plays a bit more elements with the War Chief and the Security Chief and how they're trying to double cross each other. And I love this dynamic, and he's such a fascinating character as well. What I find really strange as well in this story is that he has like a seal to prove that he's basically a Time Lord. However, we never see that symbol again. I believe that we see that symbol before in the Daleks' master plan, but we never get a mention as to what the hell that symbol even means. And the Doctor didn't seem to recognise it then. So maybe this is retconned into it. Yeah, which I found really strange, but you know, that's not a big deal. Then, above all of them, what we consider like he's basically the emperor of the War Games. We have the Warlord. Yes, the leader of the Warlords is named the Warlord. But like I said, the species wasn't actually named in this story. It was actually named in a book that Terrance Dicks wrote many years later in the 7th Doctor era, which I will not be talking about. I do apologise for fans of the Virgin New Adventures, but it's not a particular area that I'm interested in. But anyway, the Warlord is one of the greatest villains. He's basically like the Emperor, but this was made, I believe, like 7-8 years before A New Hope. So, and basically he owns the present. He comes in at about episode 8. I believe it's episode 8. And every time he's on screen, and when he talks, everybody stops talking. You get scenes where the War Chief and the Warlord are bickering with each other because at this point in the story, the Security Chief, he basically has high suspicions about the Doctor and the War Chief. And the Warlord is basically like, enough, you two either work together or you will be replaced. And it's like they bicker, and as soon as the Warlord starts talking, they stop. You could see he owns the present, and there's a brilliant moment where he's talking to the Doctor, and the Doctor kind of like plays to his ego. How, because in this part of the story, the Doctor basically pretends to work with them, and the Warlord is basically questioning him. It's like, you just changed your allegiance. And the Doctor's like, I like to play for the winning side. And you can really see it in the performance, played by Philip Maddock. Yeah, that guy who I said was one of the best guest stars in Doctor Who back in the Crotons. He returns here, I believe in the same season. I could be wrong. And he'll come back in a few more stories. So Philip Maddock, amazing actor, one of the best recurrent actors in Doctor Who that plays different roles. I completely lost where I am now. Yeah, and the Doctor's basically playing to his ego, and you can see in the performance by Philip Maddock that he knows that the Doctor is playing to his ego. You can see him kind of smiling to himself and and he kind of distances himself a bit. It's like, right, I know, I can see what you're doing there, Doc, but it still gets to him, the play into his ego, and so he does let the Doctor help him with the war games. And so in episode 9 we get this epic climax where we have a few characters basically warring about. But first, I need to talk about one of my favourite characters. He appears in episode 7 or 8, I can't remember, and then he's like in it until episode 9. Antro Velar. He's a character from the Mexican war zone, and I just love this bastard. He is so... The first time you see him, basically what happens is that a group of people who the mind control basically didn't work, they're going to start a rebellion, and so Zoe starts to get all the leaders of the rebellions up together, and so we get to meet Villar, and he doesn't listen to Zoe at first because, you know, Zoe's a girl, and so she makes Jamie pretend to be like the manly man and the leader of the operation, and the way the character is so enthusiastic. There's a brilliant, one of my favourite lines is that when they're trying to overthrow the warlords, somebody suggests to him that they should use the alien guns, and he's like, these guns are no good, I prefer my guns, they are good guns. Brilliant scene. He's just got like these quirks and stuff like that. It might be a little, I don't know if it would be racist, but I don't think it's harmful in any way. It's just an over-exaggeration of a stereotype, but a really fun one at that. So I'm gonna let this pass, but I will acknowledge that it is a stereotype. So there you go. That's a hurdle of the story. And so episode 9 and everything's battling and fighting and stuff, and they basically discover that these machines that they've been travelling around have basically losing power and only 2 ships left, so they can't get anyone home. And so the Doctor decides to call the Time Lords, and we get one of the greatest cliffhangers in the show's history. The Doctor basically calls the Time Lords, and so him, Jamie and Zoe run to the TARDIS on the muddy fields of No Man's Land, which at this point everybody's been sent home, so you don't hear any firing. And then all of a sudden the footage turns into slow motion, representing the Time Lord's power trying to overtake them. And you've got this really brilliant organ music. Oh, the music in the story is absolutely fantastic, by the way. Great representation of the time periods of the wars, and it's got a great landscape as well. But back to the cliffhanger, and you see them all run into the TARDIS, and there's an iconic shot just before the cliffhanger, the Doctor trying to get his hand onto the key of the TARDIS, and then his hand slowly starts dragging away with the organ music. Fantastic! What an amazing shot! How is this not considered some of the best Doctor Who stories ever? Maybe it is. I don't know. I know a lot of people don't like the middle half, but I don't understand why. I think it's entertaining throughout, but that's maybe just me. And then there you go. So episode 9 basically finishes the war game storyline. So in episode 10, the last Doctor Who story that has Fraser Hines, Zoe, I can't remember what the name is, that's really bad, I do apologise, and Patrick Troughton, they land on the home planet of the Time Lords, which has not been named yet. And we get to see how powerful the Time Lords are. They are mysterious. They've got this court, and the Doctor basically explains that the court for Time Lords are rare because they rarely interfere in the lives of people. And there's just something about them, the way that they don't talk that much, the way that we only see a handful of them. And there's a great bit where they're putting the Warlord onto trial, and he won't talk, and one of them just stares at him, and the light basically burns the Warlord's mind, and it shows you how formidable the Time Lords are. Even the Doctor's like, there's no way I can escape from them. And so the Warlord gets a small rebels to try and take him back to his home planet, and it fails as he kidnaps the Doctor, and the Doctor basically puts the lights on in the TARDIS to burn everyone's eyes, and so they get out and thing. And the Time Lords, what they do is, because of their crimes are so horrifying, they erase the Warlord. They erase the Warlord and his people from the timeline, erasing the entire species off the face of the timeline. That is amazing. My God, this story. I will absolutely love it. And so we get to say our goodbyes to Jamie and Zoe. And I don't think it's as heartbreaking as some previous companion departures. I think Susan is easily still the best, followed by Ian and Barbara. And, you know, I didn't tear up, but you do kind of feel there's a bit. It's like looking back at good memories, as when they go and say goodbye, the Time Lords basically explain that they've erased their memories, so only that their first adventure when the Doctor arrived on their place will be remembered of them. And you get footage of Zoe in the Wheel in Space with a cameo from one of the characters in there, which is really cool. And you get Jamie back in Scotland doing the Highlanders, and something about it's like finding pictures of old photographs that you haven't seen in ages. It has that feeling, that weird feeling of nostalgia, as if like, right, this is something that we've been through. And I think it does really work really well. Not one of the most saddest Doctor Who companion departures, but it's still very good. And so we get the Doctor's trial. We get some of the most greatest Patrick Troughton performances in the show history. Here, he's not a buffoon. He's down to earth. He's decided, and he basically explains his point of view and how he basically has been defending the universe from monsters. And you actually see him on the screen, and you get some brilliant cameos from the Quarks, the Ice Warriors, the Yeti, the Cybermen, and the Dalek, which is the last time we see them in their classic 60s design. Next time we see them, they got like a black design, which is really cool, but that's story for another time. And the Doctor gets to pick, and basically the Time Lords decide, right, you can go back to Earth because you have experience on that planet, but you're there in exile and you're losing your mind about how the TARDIS works. And the Doctor gets to choose his face, and there's a classic scene of the Doctor looking at him, and he's constantly like, he's too fat, he's too young, he's too old, he's too thin. And you know, it's basically the second Doctor then being the second Doctor again, and the Time Lords are like, right, if you're not going to decide, we're going to decide for you. Before the Doctor even gets a word in, he starts to change. Now, you might be a bit disappointed to know that he doesn't actually change into the next Doctor, John Pertwee. That was because at the time they were filming the shot, John Pertwee wasn't actually cast as the Doctor yet, so there's a fun fact for you. And it also leads into a fan theory, which, will I make a video on? Yeah, I think I'm going to make a video on season 6B. So there you go, that's the next video. So, yeah, and the Doctor's regeneration here, he basically has been forced into this, and he screams out, "No, no, 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 what are you doing? You're making me giddy." Yeah. Now, a lot of people that I know of are really confused by this, because the people who know me know that I really didn't like the 10th Doctor's regeneration, where he says, "I don't want to go." But I'm okay with this, with the Doctor being forced into regeneration into the next body. Yes, because I think in here, the regeneration is acted as a sort of punishment. It's out of his control in terms of, it's not his decision. It's not something naturally happening to him. It's something that the Time Lords, people who he looks basically down upon because he doesn't share their viewpoints, they are forcing him to change. And although, yeah, it does put a Doctor in a sort of resistance, it's not really about his face, it's more of the situation that he's been put in, which is basically to be in exile. And yeah, whilst in the 10th Doctor one, it felt more like a vanity, like he just didn't want to change because he liked that face too much, which made it feel like all the other Doctors are not important, because he preferred to be the 10th Doctor because David Tennant's the best. And all the fans know that David Tennant's the best. And so there you go. So that's why I think the War Games, it really works here. And there you go. That's my favourite Doctor Who story. So a little bit of backstory. This one is actually one that I didn't watch before 2005. I didn't have it on VHS. But it was my second Doctor story that I got on DVD. I can't remember why I decided to pick this up. I guess I just looked at the cover and thought it looked pretty cool. And it was one of the first times that I watched a story, a classic Doctor Who story, for myself. Because previously I would watch it because, somebody else has put it on, and I would get sucked into that. So, and that's how I got into the show. But here it was basically me stepping into my own territory, into a bit of area of Doctor Who, or Classic Who, that I've never seen before. So I think a part of that nostalgic factor really fits into why I like this story so much. It feels like my Doctor Who. Like this is the one that I personally own in a way, with the exception of series 1 of New Who, which I kind of get that same feeling, because I'll get into that when I talk about Rose. But yeah, so the War Games, please, if you're going to try any Doctor Who story, it might be a bit harder, this one, to digest because it is 10 episodes long, but it is, in my opinion, the best Doctor Who story in the show's history. And there you go, that's the War Games. So join me next time, where we'll be talking about Season 6B and what happened to the second Doctor after the War Games. And then we'll go on to the third Doctor story, the first one in colour, and we get introduced back to some old friends of ours. So join us next time in Season 6B video, and then later, the Spearheads from Space. I'll see you then.